my job now, but you keep trying to bring those parties together, as is happening. I know that both sides, the delegations of both sides, are still working on the issues that they want to eventually get to discuss around the table. And you keep on doing it because, frankly, what's the alternative? What is the alternative? I was asked by a journalist when I was in Ukraine the other day, who said, but, you know, look at Russia. It's not coming to the table for humanitarian things. Shouldn't you stop? I said, stop? How do you mean stop? How can you expect any humanitarian organization to stop trying to do what it's mandated to do? And I would say that there's the same imperative for those who are trying to resolve the conflict. It's not up to people like me to know whether the prospects are likely to come soon or late, but not to keep at it, that would be irresponsible. On your second point, I think perhaps you'd ask the Secretary General or his spokesman that, but I'm absolutely sure that one of the reasons why I'm going to Turkey is to look into ways in which the United Nations can support the efforts that the Turks are making with the parties. And I talked quite a bit, both in Kyiv and separately in Moscow, to the parties about those talks, and they too put quite a lot of, they put a lot of weight on them. And of course, when atrocities happen, I've had this happen in my life. When atrocities happen, you can't just keep on going on business as usual, but you need to get back to the table at some point, and I hope it's sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Philippe Rater, AFP.
Thank you. Thank you for the briefing. When you were in Moscow, did you try to see Mr. Putin? And you don't have any answer from Russian. It's more than 1 week now. Do you plan to go back to Moscow? And if you can tell us just the day where you are going to Turkey.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
No, I reckon President Putin is probably above my pay grade. So I was very happy to have very extensive meetings with Foreign Minister Lavrov and his team, as well as General Fomin. But I do want to go back, of course. And one of the points that was made to me by the Russian Foreign Ministry was this is round one of my small role, the UN's small role in this conflict in terms of this assignment. And you need to come back. And I do think so. And I want to do this after having gone to Turkey and understood better the way in which Turkey sees the war. Can I add one thing before coming to your about Turkey? I hope to go there on Wednesday, Thursday of this week. Leave here Tuesday night, tomorrow night. And Turkey is also, as you know, involved in trying to get people out of Mariupol. They've had this naval effort, this naval corridor, which to bring, I think, 800 people out of Mariupol. And it's evidence of Turkey's sort of interest in the area. And one of the things that I was speaking this morning to David Beasley, the executive director of the World Food Programme, who was telling me that, of course, let's be very clear, keeping Odessa's port open for the export of grain is, if anything, it's of the highest importance, of course, globally. I'll be going to the Horn of Africa in May because of the appalling drought that we see there that has been pushed off, of course, the news by the European crisis. Keeping Odessa's lifeline to the world of the silos that are full in Odessa port, the ships that can't go because of the mining, that's an extraordinarily important issue. And it's one we'll be discussing with the Secretary General today. And David Beasley, of course, is also seeing that as a way of trying to engage, buy Ukrainian grain through World Food Programme, deliver it around the world where it's needed at a price which is presumably a humanitarian price. And that also helps to put liquidity back into Ukraine itself. I cannot think, apart from the specific life-saving humanitarian needs of the Ukrainian people, of a more important issue than that. Odessa port as the lifeline for Ukraine and the way in which it's essential to Ukraine's economic future is, I think, something which is beginning to come through now.
Thank you. Abdallah Al-Arabi. Thank you for this briefing. Just a follow-up on the Mariupol situation. How do you describe the situation there? And also, is there any alternative ways or any actions from your side to solve this situation?
I didn't go to Mariupol, so you know it as much as I do. It's a place I've described it as a center of hell. Other people have been more vivid about it. There are upwards of 100,000 or more. We don't really know the numbers. President Zelensky referred to that in his interview with Jake Tapper yesterday. We don't really know the numbers of the people still caught and blocked and unable to get out from Mariupol. And you would think that the safe evacuation of civilians is something that both sides can agree to, and all sides can agree to, and the world can agree to. And ICRC, as you know, has made daily efforts to do that. But it's always, you know, one side or the other to blame. And of course, it's the middle of a very hot battle. And it sounds to me like when the battle is over, and if we can help most of those remaining people out and to safety and to have a future with their families, Mariupol itself is going to be a shocking sight for all of us. It's going to be a shocking sight in terms of the smashing of the city, and it's going to be a shocking sight in terms of what we may find out happened there. I had one very simple, practical suggestion, which is a marginal suggestion, frankly, in the context of this picture. And I mentioned it earlier. I said, if you want to have corridors coming out of Mariupol with any likelihood of safe passage, you've got to extend the time. And by the way, in the Donbass, there is an experience over the last 8 years of what they call windows of silence, as you know. Periods when the battle stopped to allow people to move across or get supplies or get dead bodies back to their families and so forth. Windows of silence. They even have the term for it. And that experience has not been replicated in Mariupol. What's happened is that by day, we have another offer of humanitarian corridor, not clearly cleared with the other side. And you would not be forgiven if you were one of those deciding whether to run today or not for taking a second thought. There's no doubt that we are failing the people of Mariupol.
Thank you. Jennifer Peltz, AP, and then we'll take two last questions online.
Thanks very much. I guess I'd ask, given all this, what do you think your next steps need to be, and or the next steps of anybody else?
Can I do this second one, really?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, but I think we're going through a period of religious festivals this week, last weekend, next weekend, Ramadan, Passover, Orthodox Easter, Christian, Catholic Easter. We should pray for the parties to understand the devastation that is happening as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. And we should ask the parties, as they have been asked, and as one of them, Ukraine, has said yes, to get back to that table in Istanbul to continue that essential negotiation, even if the war aims are still not clear. A lot of people said this to me on my visits. Even if the eventual war aims may be unrealized or unclear, we certainly need that to happen. On the humanitarian side, we need to have much, much more willing acceptance, primarily of the Russian Federation, to allow convoys in and convoys out in these places of great need. And we need, in those places where the war has for the moment moved on, to provide urgent, emergency, if you like, humanitarian assistance to get people to be able to see their homes again and maybe reach them. And then we need accountability for all that is happening today as well as yesterday. And of course, I saw some of that. An accountability which is going to be so important. And I think that's just the beginning of the story, because as you know, I think the legacy of this war is one that outstrips wars elsewhere, potentially. The legacy of the upsetting of international order, the criticisms of the UN and the Security Council, for example, the legacy of disaffection between peoples, between the West and the East and the South and the North. This is something which, as each week goes by, is becoming more difficult. I heard a lot about that when I was in Moscow, by the way, not from the government, but from other people I met. This is a generational problem that we're going to have to face, and it's going to be really, really difficult. So for now, let's get aid to people where they need it. The Ukrainian government is an enormously beneficial partner in this, by the way. They are really good people to work with. Let's pray that the people go back to the talks, and let's pray that there's some sense comes back to the minds of decision makers. That's small mercies.
Thank you. Margaret Bashir, Voice of America. Maggie, are you online?
I am here. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Mr. Griffiths. Thanks for all your hard work on this, as always. My question is, so we're hearing, of course, that the battle for the East, for the Donbass, is really going to be stepped up now in the coming days. And what has OCHA done to pre-position any aid? Is that even possible in the situation that's on the ground? You know, how's your contingency planning going for this? And if you could just tell us very briefly, we've of course heard about the wheat situation, but overall, how is the war in Ukraine affecting OCHA's ability to serve other vulnerable communities around the world? Thank you.
I have my 4 points.
Excellent.
Okay, let me do a crisp answer to the second one in a minute. But the first one, I think, is really, really important. We have been, you know, we have a forward operating base, to use that term, in Dnipro, in the southeast of Ukraine, and it serves to provide convoy movements, whether to Mariupol, if we should get so lucky, through Zaporizhzhia, whether to Donetsk and Luhansk, whether to Kherson, and whether to Sumy, where we have succeeded. We have not been able to get a convoy through to Donetsk directly, which would go across the line of battle. And we got to Severodonetsk. I'm sorry, my pronunciation is going to be bad. And there has been distribution from there into the Donbass, including from incredibly unsung heroes, by the way, who are, of course, as usual, the Ukrainian NGOs who go where others don't or can't. So OCHA has been pushing into the southeast towards the Donbass with supplies. And we have staff, by the way, across the Donbass, both in the non-government controlled areas and in the government controlled areas, who've been there in hiding since the beginning of the war. And so we've been pre-positioning stocks in there, but it's not enough. We've been doing the same in Odessa, by the way, because of course we're all worried about what the war may come to Odessa. And we've been trying to get stuff into Kherson, which is on the, on the route between Mariupol and ultimately Odessa through Mykolaiv. So we, to the extent possible, we're pre-positioning. WFP, of course, is very much in the fore on all this. But also cash. The great advantage of cash is you don't need to move it. You send it through the internet. And there are still parts of the southeast where cash can still be a useful way of enabling people to buy food or to buy their needs. So that, again, is happening. But the Donbass is enormously worrying, and I'm glad you asked the question. It is the center of gravity of the war, of course. There's been a lot of discussion about whether it would be wise to bring UN assistance through Russian territory into the Donbass. It's a very complicated process. We talked a lot about that in Moscow. We have a duty of care to our staff, which is in addition to our humanitarian responsibilities, to see that they are okay, that they're surviving. But our priority right now, and you will see plans to do this in the next couple of days, is to get a convoy through into Donetsk and to supply from there into Luhansk and into those different areas. And then to stay and to have our colleagues there, and it's not just the UN who has staff there. The NGOs do, the ICRC does, other organizations do too, do the work that they want to do and bravely have never stopped doing. So the Donbass is a massive, massive humanitarian worry.
Thank you. Pam, sorry.
4 quick points
Yes,
on
please,
the
please.
because it just the humanitarian impacts of the Ukrainian war outside Ukraine, and we have 4 points, which is it increases the numbers of people in need due to the price of fuel and food and grain and so forth. So WFP says up to 47 million more people will probably become in need of humanitarian assistance globally. That's on top of the 200 million. So that's, whatever the word, that's another quarter, 25% increase of people in need around the world. Number 2, new crises. We see what's happening in Sri Lanka. There were early demonstrations in Iraq, I remember, early on after the war had started. Instability due to prices and so forth is very worrying. We don't know where that's going, but it's a concern. Our operations are more expensive. I think WFP said that in Yemen, I launched an appeal on Yemen, as you may know, some time ago, a few weeks ago. It would increase the cost, the food cost in Yemen for the WFP alone of $10 million a month, $120 million for the year. And finally, the possibility that funding for other crises is squeezed by virtue of money going to the Ukraine. And I want to say one thing on that, Stefan. So far, we have not seen any evidence of that. So far, the commitments of donors to our crisis, Afghanistan the other day, Yemen before, Syria will be in a week or two in Brussels, has not diminished. We still got some donors that we like to see more from, but Western donors who give a lot of money to Ukraine are not diminishing their generosity to the rest of the world, not yet. But we worry, of course, that we may get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam Falk, CBS News. Pam?
Hi, thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths. You can hear me?
I can.
All right, thank you very much for the briefing. My question is about your statement that so many Ukrainians are returning, 30,000 a day. The OCHA recent report, 870,000 since the war began. And that President Zelensky, there is some sound on the line, but President Zelensky is encouraging people not to come back yet. Where do you think the push, if you will, people won't go back unless some of the countries or the agencies or someone is saying it's okay, unless it's sui generis and they're just making their way back. What do you think should be done, and what is actually encouraging them? Thank you so much.
Well, that's a very good question. It's a question both for Antonio Vitorino of IOM and, of course, Filippo Grandi of UNHCR. As you know, we believe in safe and voluntary return, no pressure. And it was striking, as you say, what President Zelensky had to say about this yesterday. It was very sensible and very striking. Don't rush home. There's still trouble to be ahead, and there's places to be repaired. The 870,000 figure since the beginning of the war, I gather, I have it here, is the figure from the border guards, compiling them coming in. It's not a UN figure. It's a figure from the Ukrainian border guards as people come back. And I think what it means is, of course, is that people want to go home. And they see that the war may have stopped. It's a huge question. We discuss it with a lot of people in Kyiv. Has the war stopped for good, or will it come back? You know that insanity. But people want to go home, and people everywhere want to go home if they get the chance. And most Ukrainian refugees are still in the region due to the incredible generosity of the regional neighbors. And so they want to go back. And I think it's difficult for anybody to stand in their way. If they want to go back, they should have the right to do so. But that means that we need to be ready with at least a minimum of assistance to smooth their way. There are many, many IDPs already, 6 million or more, as I said earlier, already in Ukraine, spread around the country. This will add this number to those internally displaced. We support individual families of IDPs with cash, and that is something which we're doing, as I was mentioning earlier, with the government. So these people coming back will have that assistance, but they also need their housing back, and they need their services back.
Thank you, Martin. If we could squeeze one last question from you, or an answer rather. We'll go to Iftikhar Alif, Associated Press of Pakistan. Iftikhar, are you on the line?
Thanks, Steph. Mr. Griffiths, thank you for the briefing. My been partly answered. I'll still try to ask you the same question I intended. If the situation, if the war situation in the Ukraine dramatically change, as you cited the example of Yemen, is the United Nations ready and has enough resources to take care of millions of Ukrainians coming back to their country?
Well, we should be so lucky, right? I mean, this would be a miracle if that happens, and it's, we know these are the weeks for miracles. But the United Nations has significant, I mean, not just the UN, the international humanitarian community has very significant numbers of people in the region, of course, under the leadership of UNHCR, supporting those refugees who've got out of Ukraine. Inside, I was telling you that we have 1,300 UN staff, humanitarian staff, across Ukraine. It's always difficult to scale up in crises, and Ukraine was no different. You remember we started the humanitarian response in this war in a situation where many people were saying it's not going to be a war until it started. So there was a certain amount of political pressure not to think in the worst terms of what in fact did actually happen. So we did a certain amount of planning because we did fear the worst, and many governments were telling us this. But to get the good people in and get them out to the east where their lives are in danger because you're close to the people you serve, that's been the task of the last weeks. And now, I mean, OCHA alone, let me give you from my office, we put about 70 of our best people from all over the world into Ukraine, surged them in, and they're already beginning to rotate to go back to where they have other work. So I don't know if we're going to be ready for a dramatic miracle, but we'll be a lot readier than we were for the other, which was for the war, which I think took us all, shocked us all in its gravity, in its suddenness, and in its terrible aspirations. Let's hope we do get the chance to be ready. Thank you.
Martin, thank you very much, and thanks for coming, and we hope to see you back here soon after your next round of travels.
Thanks very much, Stefan. Thank you all. Is this mine? Oh, yeah. Good. Thank you. I go there.
Oh, you can go this way.
Go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers, thanks. All right. If you still have the courage, you have myself and then Paulina to contend with. Just a couple of updates for you on phone calls the Secretary General has been making. He spoke just a few minutes ago with His Highness Sheikh Sabah Khaled Al Ahmad Al Sabah, the Prime Minister of Kuwait. The Secretary General and the Prime Minister discussed how to mobilize stronger support from the Gulf countries to the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, otherwise known as UNRWA. They discussed also the truce in Yemen, as well as prospects to improve regional security in the Gulf. The Secretary General and the Prime Minister also talked about the ongoing situation in Jerusalem. The Secretary General reaffirmed his position that the status quo with the holy sites in Jerusalem must be upheld and respected. Any provocations, he said, must be avoided at all costs. On Sunday, yesterday, Mr. Guterres spoke with the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. During the phone call, the Secretary General expressed his ongoing support for the Istanbul process in relation to the war in Ukraine and reiterated the need for humanitarian corridors for the distribution of aid and the evacuation of people. They the Secretary General discussed with President Erdogan, as he did with the Prime Minister of Kuwait, the situation in Jerusalem, and stressed the same 2 points, which is our position about the status quo at the holy sites that must be upheld and the avoidance of any provocation at any cost. Moving on to Ukraine, I was asked about earlier about the Secretary General's views on the ongoing situation, noticeably over the weekend and this morning. And I can tell you that the Secretary General is deeply concerned by the continuing attacks on Ukrainian cities across the country, including most recently Lviv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, and Mykolaiv, which are resulting in numerous civilian casualties and the destruction in residential areas as well as civilian infrastructure. The Secretary General is greatly concerned by the by the continuing appalling humanitarian situation in the besieged city of Mariupol, which has been largely destroyed by weeks of unrelenting Russian attacks. The Secretary General reminds all parties that they must take all necessary measures to avoid civilian casualties and any damage to residential areas and civilian infrastructure. The Secretary General strongly urges all parties to enact an urgent and immediate humanitarian ceasefire, which will enable safe and securing functioning of humanitarian corridors to help evacuate residents and also deliver life-saving humanitarian and medical assistance. Genuine negotiations must be given a chance to succeed and to bring a lasting peace. The Secretary General and the UN stands ready to support such efforts, as you just heard from Mr. Griffiths. I want to give you a bit more granular information on our work in Ukraine with some few additional numbers. WHO says Ukraine has now endured 136 attacks on healthcare facilities, which have killed 73 people and injured 52 others. This means that Ukraine accounts for more than 68% of all attacks on healthcare worldwide since the start of the year. Also today, our humanitarian colleagues said more than 1 in 4 people in Ukraine have now been displaced, and that adds up to about 12 million men, women, and children. That includes 4.9 million refugees and 7.1 million internally displaced people. At the same time, also want to flag concerning the recent returnees that include women and children and older people, and those are creating, as you heard from Mr. Griffiths, new challenges on the humanitarian response in terms of reconstruction and reintegration. In terms of our staff, we now have more than 1,300 staff in Ukraine engaged in the humanitarian response. We, along with our partners, have 8 operational hubs: Dnipro, Vinnytsia, Lviv, Uzhhorod, Mukashevo, Chernivtsi, Luhansk, and Donetsk. Hubs are also set up in Odessa. Hubs will also be set up in Odessa, Mariupol, and Kharkiv as soon as conditions allow. The OCHA office is reopening in Kiev, and our head of office is there. The OCHA head of office is working from there now. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that as of April 15th, more than 155,000 people have been assisted with multi-purpose cash provided by 22 partners. The figure is expected to ramp up very quickly. A convoy that had been planned for April 14th from Odessa to Kherson could not proceed due to lack of security guarantees. The convoy was offloaded in Odessa on April 13th, and the cargo was dispatched to 2 NGOs, which will distribute the supplies in Kherson Oblast through the Ukrainian Red Cross and voluntary organizations as soon as possible. The flash appeal is now 68% funded as of today, and that stands at $774 million. The country-based pooled fund, that's the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund, has received $126 million to date, of which $66 million has been paid. Another humanitarian update on a different part of the world, which I've been getting questions about, and that is northern Ethiopia. A 50-truck convoy carrying food and other humanitarian aid as well as fuel arrived in Mekelle, which is the capital of Tigray, on Friday. The convoy was carrying about 1,000 tons of food aid, which is enough food for about 43,000 people, as well as 700 tons of health, nutrition, water, and sanitation items. This also included 3 fuel tankers carrying 115,000 liters of fuel. This was the second convoy into Tigray since April 1st, following 3.5 months without any aid going in by road. However, as you can imagine, far more assistance as well as fuel is required to meet the humanitarian needs on the ground. Further convoys are ready to go from Semera to Mekele by road. We continue engagement with all to make sure that additional convoys can depart safely as soon as possible, and we can make sure that these deliveries for conflict-affected people in Tigray as well as in Afar and Amhara on a regular and predictable basis. And from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I can tell you that we are concerned about the deteriorating humanitarian situation on the ground in Ituri as the violence unfortunately continues. Last week, attacks in Jugu and Irumu territories resulted in the killing of at least 35 civilians, including 1 displaced person and 19 returnees. Insecurity has forced 9 humanitarian organizations, 1 UN agency, and 8 international NGOs to temporarily suspend their road movements in Irumu and Mombasa territories, delaying the provision of assistance to thousands of people. The humanitarian situation in Ituri has been deteriorating since last October, when attacks on civilians increased, including on sites for displaced people. This has led to significant population movements, and today the province has 1.9 million people who are displaced. Persistent insecurity has also impacted food production in Ituri, leaving thousands of families with insufficient food to eat. Food insecurity affects nearly 3 million people, particularly in Jugu, where 1 in 5 people is facing emergency hunger levels. Over the past 2 years, between March 2020 and March 2022, some 211 schools have been destroyed or damaged, leaving 55,000 children out of school across Ituri. We, along with our partners, have managed to continue to operate and provide assistance to civilians despite the volatile situation. 8 projects in shelter, health, food security, nutrition, and protection are currently being implemented in the areas of Komanda and Mombasa. Want to just flag a couple of statements that we issued over the weekend. One, which you have seen, I think, on Saturday, in which the Secretary General said he was deeply concerned about the deteriorating security situation in Jerusalem and calling on leaders on all sides to help calm the situation. Provocations on the Holy Esplanade, he said, must stop now to prevent further escalations. And he reiterated his call for the status quo. The Secretary General Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Tor Vennesland, remains in close contact with key regional partners and the parties to try to calm the situation on the ground. The Secretary General reiterates his commitment to supporting the Palestinian Israelis to resolve conflict on the basis of relevant UN resolutions, international law, and bilateral agreements. Also, on Saturday, we issued a statement congratulating Kristina Georgieva and the Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund for approving the new Resilience and Sustainability Trust effective May 2022. The trust is welcome news, especially for countries facing compounding crises, including the impact of the war in Ukraine. Full text was shared with you. And I have some positive news from Yemen. The Houthis, also known as Ansar Allah, have signed an action plan with the United Nations to end and prevent the recruitment and use of children in armed conflict, the killing and maiming of boys and girls, and attacks on schools and hospitals, and other grave violations. Virginia Gamba, our special representative for children in armed conflict, signed the action plan as a witness from New York. She welcomed this additional measure to protect children in Yemen and called on all parties to the conflict in the country to use the opportunity of current truce to prioritize the rights of children and the needs of children. As of today, the main parties to the conflict in Yemen have all signed commitments to end and prevent grave violations against children. Through the act, the Houthis have committed to identifying and releasing children from their ranks within 6 months. Ms. Gamba reiterated the availability of the UN to support the Houthis in the implementation of the agreement. And also, I was asked about the situation in Afghanistan and the bombings over the last few days. I can tell you the Secretary General is deeply concerned about reports of civilian casualties, including women and children, as a result of airstrikes reported in Afghanistan. The Secretary General expresses his condolences to the families of the victims and wishes those injured a quick recovery. And lastly, an update from the Philippines, where we and our humanitarian partners are providing assistance in the wake of heavy rains caused by Tropical Storm Megi, which has resulted in the deaths of 172 people in the Philippines. Many people are still missing. We will also provide water and sanitation supplies. The International Organization for Migration is also distributing hygiene kits as well as sleeping kits and tents. IOM is helping to manage camps for displaced people and providing mental health and psychosocial support. For our part, WFP has dispatched 24 trucks to transport food, sleeping kits, and kitchen supplies. Mr. Klein.
Yes, I'm going to take up Mr. Griffiths' suggestion to ask you directly. Either during the course of the Secretary General's conversation yesterday with Turkey's President Erdogan, or just in connection with his other deliberations on this matter, is he now considering being more proactive and maybe offering to work alongside with Turkey's president to try to mediate between President Zelensky and President Putin to get them personally involved, either in a virtual meeting involving the Secretary General or possibly face-to-face?
Sure. First of all, I think the Secretary General has been very active, and he is willing to do anything that is practical and useful and help us move towards peace. He's been on the phone with world leaders since the beginning of this crisis, including President Erdogan. Whatever we can do to help, we will do. He has made it clear right from the beginning also that his good officers are available to the parties. We are very much supportive of the Istanbul process, and we'll do what we can to make it a success. And then I think our activities on the sort of political front is also embodied through what Mr. Griffiths has done, which is going to Moscow, going to Kiev, trying to get this humanitarian pause, humanitarian ceasefire, moment of silence, whatever you want to call it, but basically to get to a point where the guns are silenced, at least temporarily, so we can get some supplies in and people who need to go out can go out.
But I'm really inquiring whether the Secretary General has tried to reach out to President Putin, as well as President Zelensky, but particularly President Putin, since the war began.
The short answer is yes.
And he's been rebuffed?
Well, I'm giving you the answer to the first part of your question. I think the results of the rest should be plain.
Can you tell us when he last tried?
Since the beginning of this crisis.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Stefan. I have a question regarding Libya. The situation there between the duel, Bashar and Dbeiba, is a little bit unclear. I mean, we're following up the updates from Stephanie Williams, but still, is the UN, how is the UN dealing with both of prime ministers? I mean, what's the methodology to deal with them?
Well, the methodology is really the basic methodology that we have everywhere in trying to find solutions, which is to talk to the two sides, to try to get them to put the interest of the Libyan people first and foremost. As you know, she was in Cairo speaking to various Libyan actors. She's there, I think, today, or she was there yesterday, speaking to the League of, to Abu Ghait, the head of the Arab League. It's about dialogue. It's about trying to bring people around a table. It's been done, you know, the Libyan leaders have succeeded before. We had agreements last year. It's clear to see what the situation is now. But I think to quote, to paraphrase Martin Griffiths, it is not our job to give up. So she will continue in her efforts. Okay, I don't see or hear of any other questions. I think I shall leave you in the company of Polina Kubiak on behalf of the PGA.
Good afternoon, everyone. The President of the General Assembly, Abdullah Shahid, is now en route to New York from Palau, where he attended the Our Ocean Conference. Tomorrow, he will take part in the opening of the ECOSOC Youth Forum that will be via video message to an interactive discussion. The President is expected to say that the future of policymaking, of multilateralism, and of global cooperation will be determined by what young people make of it. He will highlight his Fellowship for Hope, a number of the fellows you've met in this room, including Stella, who is here today. He will also highlight the importance of engagement of young people on issues such as finding solutions in the fight against COVID or climate change, and the importance of youth involvement in the United Nations. This was most recently discussed at our Common Agenda, those thematic debates. I wanted to let you know about an event that will take place this Friday, 22nd of April, the interactive dialogue, Harmony with Nature and Biodiversity, Contributions of Ecological Economics and Earth-Centered Law. That will be held in the trusteeship. Friday, as you know, is International Mother Earth Day. The interactive dialogue will be open to all member states and observers of the General Assembly, the UN system, and relevant stakeholders. There will not be a pre-established list of speakers, and I'll share the program for that with today's noon briefing notes. And some information about the next President of the General Assembly for the 77th session. In accordance with Resolution 71-323, there will be an informal interactive dialogue with the candidate for the presidency, Mr. Csaba Kurusi of Hungary. That will be held on Thursday, 5th of May at 10 a.m. in the trusteeship. The ambassador's vision statement was circulated on 17th of February and can be found on President Abdullah Shahid's website, and you'll have the link to that with the notes as well. That's what I have for you today. Any questions for me? Yes, please.
Hi, Jen Peltz from AP. I was wondering whether you had heard anything about a potential date for debate and or a vote on a resolution that is on the bubble about routing to the Assembly automatically anything that's vetoed in the Security Council.
So we have not officially we have not received a request from Liechtenstein yet. I know that there is an informal briefing to member states tomorrow, but that's something that Liechtenstein is being organizing in their own capacity, not related to the GA. Any other questions for me? Yeah.
On the note you read about the next candidate for PGA, is the Hungarian ambassador the only candidate, or do you expect other candidates? Or?
He is the only candidate.
There's no there's no window for time for people to put their candidacy to vote.
Such as from the seat, if you will?
I don't know. I'm just asking,
Right.
because last year we have two, if I'm not mistaken.
Let me just triple check that there's no other opportunities in the calendar for any other candidates.
Thank you.
Sure, of course. All right, let me double check if there are any questions for me in the chat. I don't think so. All right, thanks very much, everyone.